Hi, welcome to video 4. This is the video where we introduce the most central idea in critical thinking, and indeed in any course on critical thinking or logic or about reasoning in general. And this is the idea of argument. In the movie 12 Angry Men, which we are watching, there are a lot of arguments, and there are two senses of that, though. In one sense, people are arguing in that they disagree and they yell at each other. That's not what we mean here. More in critical thinking, when we talk about argument, we mean the action of giving reasons for a conclusion, right? So in the next scene in 12 Angry Men, the other jurors are going to give arguments to Henry Fonda for the claim that the boy is guilty. So argument is one of the most basic parts of reasoning. And I want to start actually by giving you a really basic example of it. So here is a passage describing someone, we'll call her Monica, and she's playing Clue. In case you don't know, Clue is an old board game where you pretend to be a detective trying to solve a murder. So Monica might reason, the possible murder weapons are the knife, the candlestick, the revolver, the rope, the lead pipe, and the wrench. The murder weapon was not the knife. The murder weapon was also not the revolver, rope, lead pipe, or wrench. Therefore, the murder weapon was the candlestick. This is a very basic form of reasoning. This is reasoning by process of elimination. It's one of the most basic things you can do with your brain. And in this case, what is being done with process of elimination is a kind of argument. Now, this could be reasoning that is going on inside Monica's mind. She's just reasoning internally to herself. Or she could be speaking aloud to another player. Maybe they're playing as a team. In any case, the reasoning has the same structure. It's composed of premises and conclusions, and all of these things are statements. So let's get some more concrete definitions. Actually, before we can define an argument, we need to talk about a statement. A statement is a unit of language, some stretch of words or symbols or something like that, that can be true or false. Not everything you do with language involves making statements. You can ask questions or give commands. Those aren't true or false. Statements are the parts of language that are true or false. So then an argument is made up of statements. We define an argument as a connected series of statements designed to convince an audience of another statement. The conclusion is the statement that you're trying to convince the audience of, and the premises are the statements that do the convincing. Let's go into more detail about the idea of a statement, because it actually kind of cuts against a distinction that you may have, you probably actually had to learn in high school, and that's the idea of a fact versus opinion. For us, both facts and opinions are going to be statements, because they can be true or false. So we would say a statement is a unit of language that can be true or false. So the first basic requirement on a statement is that it has to be a complete sentence, right? So the phrase, my dog Edie, is not a statement. It's just a noun phrase. The stretch of words is running is not a statement. It's a verb phrase. When you put them together, you get my dog Edie is running. And now you not only have a complete sentence, but you've got something that could be evaluated as true or false. Edie passed away some years ago, so we would wind up evaluating it as false. But the point is that it now has the right structure that you can say it's true or false. So for our purposes, these words will be used more or less interchangeably. Sentence, statement, assertion, proposition. When we get into hardcore philosophy of language, if you were to study that, people would start making distinctions between these, but we're not going to worry about the differences there. So statements are contrasted with a number of other things. We already mentioned that a statement is not a sentence fragment, right? So wandering disoriented in a field is a sentence fragment, not a statement. Statements are also contrasted with other things that we can do with language, like ask questions. You can ask, why was the man wandering disoriented in a field? And that is it's a thing that you can do with language, but it's not true or false. The answer will be true or false, but the question is not true or false. Commands. Stop wandering and do something with your life. Commands are obeyed or not obeyed, but you can't really say the command is true or the command is false. Or an exclamation. Oh, the poor man. Exclamations express emotion, and they evoke emotion, but they are not true or false. They just are expressions. So when we talk about statements, we're talking about a wide range of things, including things that you may have been taught are to set aside as people's opinions, and also things that you may have been taught are very important, facts. But when we talk about facts and opinions, you're really mushing together a couple of different distinctions. And I'm going to ask you, I ask you to watch a video by John Corvino that does a really good job of explaining this. Basically, sometimes when we talk about an opinion, we mean it's something like something we haven't proven yet, something we can't have much confidence in. I think that it will be sunny tomorrow, but I don't know. Other times when we talk about opinions, we're talking about things like preferences or moral statements. So fact and opinion won't be a big deal for us. One thing that will be a big deal is the difference between descriptive statements and normative statements. I do want to emphasize this. These are both statements. They're both things that can be true or false, but they're true or false in very different ways, right? A descriptive statement is a statement about the way the world is. The cat is on the mat. It could be true, it could be false. You'd have to identify which cat you're talking about and then check. Objects near the Earth's surface fall at an accelerating rate of 9.8 meters per second per second. This, again, is a statement about the world, the way it is right now. It's a true statement. You discover it by measuring. Normative statements are statements about the way the world should be. So if I say you shouldn't chew with your mouth open, I am making a statement. I might be right, I might be wrong, but it's not going to be proven right or wrong by looking at the way the world is. But at least in some ways, normative statements can be true. And to show this, I want to give you the example of this statement. Torturing babies for fun is wrong. This is implicitly a should statement. It is about the way the world should be. You shouldn't torture babies for fun. Well, maybe somewhere out there there's some monster that's doing that, but that doesn't change the truth of the statement as a should statement. So, again, descriptive statements are about the way the world is. Normative statements are about the way the world should be. Either way, we typically say they are things that are true or false. So a statement can be true or false, and then an argument is composed of statements. Another thing that we can talk about is an inference. An inference is the connection between the statements in an argument. So if you go premise, premise, conclusion, right? When you move from the premises to the conclusion, you are making an inference. Another thing we want to talk about are kinds of premises. Arguments can contain both normative and descriptive statements, right? So consider this example. O.J. intentionally killed Nicole Brown. It is wrong to intentionally kill people, therefore what O.J. did is wrong. The first statement is descriptive. It could be true, it could be false. We're not going to decide that here. The second statement is normative. It's about what you should or shouldn't do. It's wrong to intentionally kill people. We're also not going to resolve the ethics of killing. When it's acceptable, when it's not. But at least some of the time it's not. And then you get a normative conclusion. What O.J. did is wrong. In general, if you've got a normative conclusion, you must have at least one normative premise. Okay, so one of the most basic things that we're going to be doing in this course is looking at passages and try to decide whether or not those passages contain an argument in the sense that we're using it here. And there's some basic rules for how to do this. The core idea is to simply look to see if some statements support others. If you can identify a statement as a conclusion and other statements as reasons to believe that conclusion, then you have an argument. We can also use indicator words and indicator phrases to identify arguments. In English, we often, in any language, but we're doing English here, there are ways that you indicate to your audience that you are giving an argument. So there are premise indicators and conclusion indicators. These are just words that say, hey, the statement that comes next is a premise, or the statement that comes next is a conclusion, right? So the most common premise indicator word is just because. We know the boy committed the murder because it was done with a very unusual knife, right? The most common conclusion indicator word is therefore. The old man saw the boy stab his father, therefore the boy is guilty. Now, people sometimes use indicator words misleadingly. So that means that you can't always rely on them. Also, a lot of times people will just leave the indicator words out. So the indicator words are just indicators. They're not 100% guarantees. The thing that really makes it is just the fact that some statements support others. So once you identify an argument, one of your basic tasks is going to be to put it in standard form. So when you put something in standard form, you list the premises, you just give them numbers, you draw a line, and you write the conclusion. The idea here is that it actually kind of looks like mathematics, right? So let's make a concrete example. This is the argument that I gave from Clue, now rephrased in standard form. Premise 1, P1, the possible weapons are the knife, the candlestick, etc., etc. P2, we rule out the knife. P3, we rule out the revolver, the rope, the lead pipe, etc. You draw a line, and then you write the conclusion. The murder weapon was the candlestick. We write indicator words separately. We take the indicator words out of the passage and write them separately. So the therefore goes at the bottom there. In ordinary language, a conclusion can come anywhere in the passage. It can be at the beginning, it can be at the end, it can be in the middle. Sometimes it's in both the beginning and the end, and that's actually a very strong way to write. In general, the beginnings and endings of things is what the audience notices most. And you want to put the most important thing in those spots. So if you put the conclusion in both the beginning and the end of a paragraph, for instance, you are writing a very forceful paragraph. Burying the conclusion in the middle is less forceful. Either way, though, when you write it in standard form, we move the conclusion to the end, right? So, in a sense, part of the game of putting things in standard form is just identifying the conclusion, putting it at the end. So, when you put things in standard form, you can go ahead and paraphrase to make them shorter. There are going to be some long speeches, for instance, in 12 Angry Men, and you might just reduce them to something simple, like the old woman heard the murder. Nevertheless, I want you to use complete sentences. And this is just because arguments are composed of statements, and I want everyone, as a part of critical thinking, to be used to thinking in complete sentences, statements that are true or false. Don't change the meaning when you paraphrase. You should also change questions and commands into statements. So oftentimes in English, we give statements, but we frame them as questions. We call these rhetorical questions. So if the boy was guilty, why did he return to the scene of the crime? The implication there is the boy isn't guilty because he returned to the scene of the crime. So you want to rephrase the statement, a question, as a statement. Same thing for command. So if someone says sit down, you change that to you should sit down. That way, if you want to keep it in the argument, it's a statement. When you see a passage and you want to put it in standard form, you're going to delete irrelevant material. If something is said twice, like for instance, if the conclusion appears twice, you only say it once, you remove the indicator words, write them separately. So that's going to be the most basic thing we're doing. And your homework will start out involving situations where you are asked to read a passage, say whether or not it is a statement, whether or not it is an argument, and if it is an argument, put it in standard form. Most basic thing we do here. Once we have our arguments in standard form, we can begin to evaluate them. And that's going to be the subject of the video after the next movie commentary video. Evaluating arguments is something that people have done throughout human history. So when we study critical thinking, we are engaged in a basic study that's been done forever. And in many ways, a critical thinking textbook, like the one we're using, or any of the more expensive ones you could buy at the bookstore, is part of a tradition that goes back way far. In ancient Greece, Aristotle wrote a book called Sophistical Refutations. It was basically a handbook for reasoning. It was a critical thinking textbook. In ancient India, the Nyaya Sutras, sometime between 600 BCE and 200 CE, dating is really hard for the history of Indian philosophy. But there were critical thinking handbooks. Warring States China, Moja, wrote a critical thinking handbook, essentially. So this is an old practice. All right, the last bit of vocab I want to introduce here is the idea of a fallacy. A fallacy is an argument that appears to be good. And we're going to develop some vocabulary for talking about describing good arguments. We'll say that they're valid or strong or sound or cogent. In any case, a fallacy is an argument that appears to be good but is not. In general, a fallacy is just a common mistake in reasoning. So a lot of what we're going to be doing in this course is, after we put arguments in standard form, we want to say, is this a fallacy or not? All right. So the next thing you need to do is the homework, and so read the text, identify some passages as arguments or non-arguments, identify some individual things as statements or non-statements. And then we're going to go on and watch another scene from the movie, and I will be diagramming the arguments, putting the arguments that the characters give in that scene in standard form.